I wish to acknowledge that we're meeting this evening on the traditional territory of the Saanich people who have lived, learned, worked, and cared for these lands for thousands of years. We're thankful for this, and we offer our acknowledgement respectfully and gratefully. I also wish to welcome members of the management team to our board's meeting, including, of course, Superintendent Eberlin, Secretary Treasurer Reid, Assistant Superintendent McKenzie, and Director of Instruction Hunter, Director of Instruction Westhaver. We have two trustees joining us online, Vice Chair Silzer and Trustee Van Well. Welcome. And I see three of our partner representatives online as well. Ms. Misovic, the President of the Confederation of Parent Advisory Councils of Saanich. Ms. Postlethwaite, representing the Saanich Administrators Association. And Ms. Whitney, the President of QP 441. So let me welcome you to our meeting as well. We don't yet see Mr. Don Peterson, the President of the Saanich Teachers Association, but I expect that he'll be joining us before long. Trustees, may I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Trustee Vanville, seconded by Trustee McMurphy. Are there any proposed revisions, late items, changes? All right. All in favor of the agenda as circulated? Any opposed? Motion's carried and the agenda is adopted. Prior to this regular January meeting, the board held an in-camera meeting and discussed personnel matters. Item 3 has to do with the regular board meeting minutes of November 29, 2023. Trustees, are there any errors or omissions for the minutes of November 29, 2023? Trustee McMurphy?
I just have a question on 13. Sorry. It's number 2, dropped through the agenda, but it's at the top of the second page. It says, Chair Duncan, for the prior regular meeting, the board held an in-camera meeting and discussed personnel matters, and then and facilities is capitalized. Is that a reason for that?
No,
it's
that
just
should
personnel matters and facilities.
Yeah, that should be regular text. So
okay.
Is there any objection to changing the text, please, for that? Thank you. We'll fix that. Thank you, Trustee McMurphy. Any other concerns with the minutes, trustees? Thank you. Then I'll declare that they be adopted with that amendment as noted by Trustee McMurphy and designated by the board. Trustees, there is no business arising out of the minutes that I'm aware of. There are no presentations or delegations tonight, but this is the first opportunity, of course, for guests and partner representatives to ask any questions if there are any. Thank you. Not seeing any. There'll be another opportunity later, of course. And we'll move on then to the report from the chair as item 6. And first, I want to welcome us all back from the Christmas break. In the time since our last meeting in December and the time over the break, it's passed quickly. And I was reflecting that one of life's principles, I think, is that when we are engaged in productive matters, a change in routine and a change in perspective is inevitably renewing and refreshing and encouraging. And so accordingly, I trust that the break that occurred for us all from December 22 to January the 8th, while busy too, undoubtedly, served its purpose and was enjoyable to all our students, our staff, our partners, and of course to trustees, and encourages us further, and energizes us further as we continue the work through to the spring break, which will be upon us before we know it. With respect to perspective 2, I wish to comment actually on the boardroom this evening. In the sense that we're surrounded by the artwork and the presentations of students to remind us of the work we do. And so I would encourage us all to review and appreciate this when we have the opportunity. What we see currently on the walls in the boardroom, and is so often the case, is the work of Lochside Elementary students. And so we appreciate them and the school for offering this to us. And it's a reminder to spend time reflecting on what they represent, and also remind us on why we do what we do in public education, encouraging us and inspiring us. And if you'll forgive me a personal anecdote about this, some years ago, it was my responsibility to bring remarks to an administrators and teachers retirement dinner. And I happened to come across a poster here from a student quoting a French author saying, "What I had to do, I did it the best I could." And so somehow that served its purpose in crafting some remarks to encourage the retirees that we recognize they had done the best they could. That's one little personal example that I think we can all benefit from taking the time to look at these on occasion. We spend so much time here, and it's so regimented with the business that they're right here to remind us of why we do what we do. So thank you for that. The final preparations are, I was going to say virtually complete, but I'll expand on that in a moment. For our board planning day this Friday afternoon here in the boardroom, we're privileged to have Dr. Jordan Tinney to facilitate our session. As you know, Dr. Tinney has a long history with Saanich and a distinguished career in the province. And he will be facilitating our discussion on governance, including evidence-based planning and supporting senior staff and the district in achieving our strategic plan goals. We'll be joined by Superintendent Eberwin and by Secretary Treasurer Reid. So I want to express thanks at this point to Trustee McMurphy, who as Vice Chair at the time worked with Dr. Tinney and me in laying the groundwork for this, to Vice Chair Silzer for continuing that, to the Superintendent for his involvement, and of course to Dr. Tinney himself, and to each of you for considering his survey and his draft agenda for the evening. The uncertain element, if there is one, is Jordan Tinney's travel plans. He was in touch with us today, and given the difficult situation at the Vancouver airport, has made arrangements to route himself through Edmonton to Calgary to Victoria tomorrow to be here for us, given that Air Canada offered him a Saturday flight as the alternative. So we appreciate that struggle. There's some very good news with respect to our nature-based early childhood education center on VNS Road. It's expected that the Shishut facility will open in February at the latest. On behalf of the board, thank you again to Beacon Community Services for our partnership in its staffing and operation of the facility. The parent engagement evening scheduled for February 22 is upon us before long. The theme will be looking at student success in Saanich. And thank you, President Misevic and Superintendent, for organizing this event. I understand too that administrators are continuing to work with you on the evening and what that will look like, because it's a fairly broad topic to be narrowed down. There'll be a board chairs call tomorrow afternoon, which I intend to participate in. It involves an update from the Ministry of Education and Child Care, apparently about Bill 40, which we'll hear about from the superintendent in his report today, and a report on FESL, the Framework for Enhanced Student Learning. BCSTA is a co-sponsor of the call, and they want to speak about BCSTA surveys, some advocacy. I'm not clear on what that involves, and codes of conduct. And you may remember that they've been using ours as an exemplar as they work with other districts to ensure that each has an appropriate code of conduct. We're about to move concretely into development of the 2024-25 district budget, and with its timeline, guiding principles, and consultation plan. Many thanks to Secretary Treasurer Reid and to Director of Finance Semiglia for their work. in this for distilling the process and the information into manageable segments for us and our partners in what's inevitably a challenging exercise, exacerbated, as we know, by chronic underfunding and particularly by unfunded inflationary costs, including, by way of example, a discussion we had in committee of unfunded inflationary costs relating to information technology, which is critical. The first Budget Advisory Committee meeting will be held on January 25 here, and we encourage our partners, of course, to provide early notice of suggestions and contributions to contribute to that process. I also anticipate that we'll be addressing a motion later this evening suggesting that we arrange a meeting with the Minister of Education and Childcare to press for adequate funding and appropriate funding model. It was a pleasure to attend the ILC Individual Learning Center graduation ceremony on January the 11th with Vice Chair Silzer and Trustee McMurphy. And on behalf of staff, the superintendent attended and Assistant Superintendent McKenzie and Director Westhaver as well. We had 18 grads from the tax program and a light number from the hairstylist. Vice Chair Silzer brought greetings from the board to the hairstylist, and I did so for the task graduates. It was encouraging and affirming, not only because it was a mid-year graduation, so that we could perhaps revel in it more than a compressed series of grads, but it was also a demonstrative of the success of these career programs for students who may not reach their maximum potential in our brick and mortar schools and in our academic programs. So thank you to Principal DeClercq and Vice Principal Ellis and the staff of ILC for the continuing good and hard work at that school. And finally, I want to mention the Local Enhancement Agreement meeting that occurred this Monday or Tuesday, January 15, whatever that was, Monday, with the Saanich School Board and staff. I was pleased that Trustees McMurphy and Elder could attend with me for the board, and our staff was represented by the superintendent, by Director Hunter, by District Principal Austin, Program Coordinator McRae, and principals Paz, Dennett, and Harris from our 3 levels as we discussed several matters of import. I'll mention just 3. One was increasing Indigenous voice in our governance pursuant to our March 2022 motion directing staff to investigate processes with the nation on how we might do that. There was an interesting discussion around that. It was well received, and it will be taken to the full board for consideration, and obviously we will be advised in due course of ideas, proposals, and suggestions that may arise from that board's discussion. Second, it was proposed that our 2 boards, our respective boards, engage in a board's retreat rather than meet very occasionally, as has been the case of late, and then be constrained by the formality of the meeting rules. That we spend some time perhaps in more personal venues, dinner at a meeting or something like that, getting to know one another a little better, building some relationships a little more closely, so that we might be able to tackle the work, the continuation of the work. And third was Bill 40 presented by Superintendent Eberlin, but of course he's going to address that as a substantive part of his report shortly. I'd like to invite Trustees Elder and McMurphy and the Superintendent to offer any points they may wish to with respect to the LEA meeting before we conclude. Trustee Elder?
Sure, thank you, Chair. I was struck by the quality of the conversation, not just the content, but the very clearly evident, respectful partnership or connection that is present with the Saanich School Board and its staff and the Saanich Board of Education and senior staff and principals, as you said. There was a lot of good ground covered at that meeting. And above that sat this feeling of really respectful connections and purpose, intention to do good work together. So we're talking about board relations and getting our heads around Bill 40, as the superintendent will share later. The Indigenous Education Council being a particular challenge, but a welcome one. There was a sense that there was also within that a focus on young people and the well-being of students from the Saanich Nation and the Four Villages, and the respect that the Saanich Nation clearly has for the good work being done by people in the school district in support of the 300 and some students who are from the nation and attending our schools. So it was all around a very positive experience in terms of how it felt and what was obviously a strong relationship and connection, but also some real work that was done. So accommodations to our everyone who had their part in organizing and in making commitments for going forward. Thank you, Shane.
Thank you. Thank you. Trustee McMurphy.
Yeah, I echo what Trustee Elder said. Certainly those would be my sentiments as well. I think it was evidence of the old order changes giving way to new. We are in a process of change in the kind of relationships we have and the responsibilities and the objectives. And I think for me, what was healthy about the strongest coming out of that meeting was I sensed a commitment to do as Dr. Elder said, which is get to know each other better, find a good foundation to go and build on going forward. Because the relationships are different and we're not used to them, and I think we'll need to be exploring those as we go along. Because there's certainly potential for conflict, and I think the greater strength we have in our relationships, the more likely we are going to be able to work together to address those potential points of stress or conflict or difference of opinion or objective.
Thank you. Superintendent.
Thank you. I'll just say a couple of words. I think we are fortunate in our district to have a community of trust and respect, local First Nation villages. We've had that for a number of years, and while people change, as Trustee McMurphy has said, that feeling of trust and respect continues. And we're fortunate, and we certainly don't take it for granted, and we need to always pay attention to that relationship because it's what helps move things forward, as Trustee Elder talked about. I would like to mention as well that I think it sometimes goes without saying, but I want to say it tonight, that having Principal Austin as a member of the Startup Nation, well respected within the Indigenous community, and a very significant part of our district leadership team here in Saanich, has helped to bridge many situations that might have turned in a direction that we didn't want into a direction that is positive and continuing to foster the growth and the relationship that we hold here with the local villages and the Saanich School Board. So a big thanks to her, even though she's not able to be here this evening. But we look forward to the work ahead with the nation in the presently changing landscape, as Trustee McMurphy has talked about.
Thank you all three for those comments and perspectives. Before we leave the chair's report, I want to return briefly, because it's on the agenda, to the Shashishuch facility and its opening. Our understanding is that the Ministry of Education and Child Care has no specific plans for an opening ceremony. And so that falls in our court. And so my suggestion is, and I would invite from trustees, a motion directing staff to organize an opening ceremony for the facility, perhaps after spring break. Trustee McMurphy.
I'm certainly prepared to make that motion, but would it be appropriate to say in conjunction with People Community Services, or do you think it's something that we should be doing myself.
I would defer to senior staff on that. I haven't thought about it, frankly.
Yes, so an event, an opening event for the center would be coordinated with Beacon Community Services because it is a partnership. So that certainly could be reflected in the motion that it be planned in conjunction with Beacon.
Sure, well, I would move then that staff be requested to plan an opening ceremony for the Shisha childcare opening in coordination and conjunction with the community services.
And perhaps we could address the timing, Trustee McMurphy, after spring break. If that makes sense.
Because I have already.
Okay, we'll leave it with staff then. All right. Is there, Trustee Vandal, you're seconding the motion? Trustee McMurphy, do you wish to speak further to it? Anybody else? Trustee Dickey?
I just wonder if we could make a friendly addition or an amendment, whichever is most appropriate, that we send an invitation to the Minister of Education and Childcare to join us when this is set up.
Any objection to that, Trustee McMurphy? And why don't we include the Minister of State for child care as well? Who's the new one, who's now Minister Dean. So that's okay by you? It's not? Who is it now?
It's
Grace Laura. The one who was at ILC with us.
She's now the Minister of Family and Child Development.
Oh.
Yes, it is the Minister of State Dean now.
Oh, is it? Oh, sorry.
As of yesterday.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, sorry, I'm getting my
Minister of
titles mixed
State,
up.
not Minister.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Minister of State.
Oh, God.
So with trustees, is there any objection to including the invitations for those two ministers in motion? See none, so thank you, Trustee Hickman, they'll be included. Any further discussion on the motion, trustee? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Thank you. Trustee McMurphy.
That's right, I missed the second.
Trustee Vandal. Trustee McMurphy.
Following on Rising from your report, I wonder if I could move another motion. That the board express its appreciation and admiration to the staff and students of Lochside Elementary for the excellent artwork they have provided to enhance the school district boardroom.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for that? That's, thank you. Trustee Hickman, that's appropriate.
We often get student artwork and I know Lochside is often the one that does provide it, but nonetheless, it's just, when you look around both sides of this room, I don't know about you, but I see creativity, I see reflection of our strat plan. I see, the individual students in all their varieties expressing themselves. And I just think it is such a demonstration of what it means to be a student in one of our schools writ large on our bulletin boards. And so I really appreciate the work that they've done in inspiring the students to do this, but then all the logistical work of getting it out here and getting it up. And I know that's our staff here, Michelle particularly looks after that, and kudos to her. Maybe someone can tell her that we appreciate it.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Trustee Vandal?
I'd just like to add to Trustee Murphy's comments. I see what we should see around our boardroom and in our schools, our students' work. That's why we're here. So kudos to Lochside, so we can appreciate that work.
Thank you. All right, trustees, I'll put the question on the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, Trustee. And we'll turn now to the report from the superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two items on my report this evening to share with the board and partners here. This evening, I am going to be talking about the recently passed Bill 40, the School Amendment Act that was passed in late fall. This has been the first opportunity to bring this information before the board, and I'm happy to share what the act is and where we are in the planning process around its implementation. I also want to bring to the board's attention a policy review request that has come from a parent And we'll go over that briefly as well too. And we'll be looking for the board's response to that particular request. So first I wanted to talk about Bill 40. District Principal Austin was going to be here this evening, but she had an engagement out of town and was unable to make the connecting ferry. So she passes along her regrets this evening. So I will do my best as a solo act here to give you some perspective on this very significant act that was passed by the legislature, as I said, this fall. This act contains specific language around some significant changes in the relationship that school districts are going to be having with their local First Nations communities. It provides clear specificity on the local education agreement, of which the board chair talked briefly about in his report earlier this evening, both on the language about the LEA, but also the options available to the local First Nations community. It provides priority enrollment at elementary, middle, and secondary schools for Indigenous students who live on reserve. And it creates the requirement to have an Indigenous Education Council in every school district. There are many school districts that have Indigenous Education Councils, and there are some that do not. Saanich does not have one. We have a different organization where we work directly with the Saanich School Board in terms of that coordination of understandings and expectations and goals. But this new act requires and mandates it for all 60 school districts in the province. So I'll take these one at a time here so that the board can understand a bit more about what the legislation looks like. In terms of school of choice, this is to be implemented in time for the September 2024 opening of schools. And this act provides the local First Nation to designate a school of choice for Indigenous students who are living on reserve. This is specific to First Nation students, and in particular, First Nation students who are living on reserve. So between now, January, and next September, we will be having ongoing conversations with the local First Nations community, the Saanich community, to work through that particular requirement. Currently on our registration form, we have enough information there. Currently, we don't need to change it. You will see that there is a field that talks about status on reserve and which particular band or village that student is associated with. So we've drawn this attention to our administrators, and so as those registrations are coming in, they are being flagged and making sure that they are prioritized for registration purposes. These students will have priority registration within timelines currently designated by any school district, including ours. So for example, really the only one that's pertinent is the kindergarten registration, which is coming up this month. The other registrations happen on an ongoing basis, and we have always been able to accommodate local First Nation students on reserve to the school that they want to go to. What this act does is provide for the requirement or the option for the local First Nation to designate that school. We don't foresee this as any significant problem because we've been able to accommodate it. The reason for this part of the legislation is more to do with rural school districts where there are large distances that need to be traveled to attend a particular school, and the implications of those students may not be, the options for those students may not have been able to be honored in the past because of the distances that we traveled that will need to take place. But because our distances are so close and we have capacity in our elementary, middle, and secondary schools, this won't be a logistical challenge for our district. Interesting about this act is the transportation that may be required to attend the school of choice. This is something that still needs to be clarified from the provincial level. There are ongoing conversations between the provincial government, Ministry of Education and Child Care, the provincial First Nations representatives, and local nations as well. So this is ongoing conversation, and we'll be receiving more information as to what the impact on transportation might be, including the potential cost increases that might come out of that. The local education agreement, we have one of those, as we've indicated already this evening. We've had it in place for quite a number of years. This act now provides First Nations with the choice as to whether they want an LEA. That is going to continue. We have one, as I said, but the local nation, the Wasanich Nation, now has a consideration or has a decision that they need to make, and it is solely within the First Nations prerogative. They can choose to not have an LEA. They can choose to remain in their existing LEA. They could negotiate a brand new LEA, or coming out in the spring of this year, there will be a new provincial model LEA that they could choose to use as well. So those are conversations that will be ongoing with the local nation as well later for the remainder of this school year. Indigenous education councils are now mandated for all 60 school districts. This act pertains to public school districts and not to First Nations. There is a requirement mandated by this act for the school districts to ensure that there is an IEC that meets the provincial standard. But important to note is that the terms of reference for what this looks like will be set out in a new ministerial order coming in the spring of 2024. And IECs, while established by the local Board of Education, are independent from the Board of Education and will prioritize membership to First Nations on whose territory the school districts reside. The First Nation will determine the composition of the committee. The First Nation will determine how the committee operates and how it will liaise with the school board. But because this act applies to public school districts, it is this board's responsibility to create an IEC and establish it through the terms of reference that will be coming out later this spring. The First Nation has the ability to invite trustees and district staff to attend IEC meetings, but they will not be voting members of the council. The purpose of the IEC is several-fold. One, to integrate Indigenous worldviews and perspectives, to advise the board on Indigenous student achievement, to advise the board on their distinct languages, cultures, customs, traditions, and history of the local First Nation, the Wasanich First Nation in this case, to review and approve plans and reports related to Indigenous education targeted funds. These are dollars that come specifically to the district that are targeted. And this is a significant change in the operation of the board, of this board, as it will no longer have final decision-making authority on how those funds are spent within our district. To advise the board on other grants such as Feeding Futures in relation to Indigenous students. So it's an advisory role. So what does the planning look like? As I said, the province continues its consultation with the First Nations Education Steering Committee, which is the provincial First Nation representative, on what this implementation will look like and what the guidebook will look like coming out later in the springtime. This January, student priority registration has already begun in our school. And as I said, we anticipate minimal effects on our schools. Earlier this week, as indicated by the board chair, we had an LEA meeting with the Wasanich First Nation where we discussed the possibility of what the LEA format would look like for next year. We discussed the school of choice and how this will be determined by the First Nation. We've had preliminary discussions on the Indigenous Education Council requirement while we're still waiting for the provincial terms of reference to come out later this spring. And as indicated at the LEA meeting, transportation considerations will also be clarified in the spring documentation. That is a brief overview of the Act, and I will pause at this point, Mr. Chair, if there are questions that I can answer at this time before I move on to my second topic.
Is any comments or questions on this portion of the superintendent's report? It doesn't preclude them at the end, but if you have them now, it's not. Trustee McMurphy?
Could you just go back to the LEA? Well, you probably don't need to. My question was, there's a suggestion there that an LEA be negotiated.
No, it's not negotiated. It is determined by the First Nation.
It says negotiated with LEA.
Oh, they could create a, that's the term in the act, but it is, if they want a new LEA, they would meet with us to discuss what they would like to see within it. They would work with the school district to determine what that LEA format would look like.
And my question is, what if you do not come to consensus?
I hope that within the spring documentation, we will see what that will look like.
Trustee Elder?
Questions, one somewhat minor. Can you clarify through your chair, Superintendent, that when a First Nation can determine schools of choice for children, that means a school of choice for each individual child? We don't have to declare that all of our elementary children will go to Lochside. They would say Dave goes to Lochside, Kim goes to Jeepco based on family preference.
Right, no, it's a great question, and through the chair. The First Nation, through whatever mechanism they will determine, will be able to ensure that every First Nations child who lives on reserve can attend elementary school A, middle school B, or secondary school C. That does not preclude a family who lives on reserve of choosing another school. A priority registration, there will be guaranteed a spot in that one elementary school, that one middle school, or that one secondary school. It's not an individual choice that's made, it is a collective choice of priority registration at that particular school.
So 3 schools will be one of each.
There will be 3 schools named within the Saanich School District.
Can I follow up on that?
Yes.
Currently, from the 4 villages all within one nation, there are children attending lots of different places.
Correct.
You know, increasing numbers of children from the north going to North Saanich compared to the old days with Parkland, and certainly the split between Qualset and Brentwood. I would expect, and I'll lift my voice up at the end of this to make it a question, but it's a statement. I would expect that the nation would still have the opportunity to choose more than one, since currently there are larger numbers of students in more than one. They wouldn't be required by this act to designate just one and then go through the rigmarole of having individuals choose another. Is that?
The act is very clear in this, in that the nation, if they so wish to choose a school, will choose only one elementary school, only one middle school, and only one secondary school. But that does not preclude families from going to other schools. In our district, we don't foresee this as any hurdle at all, because, for example, we have many First Nation students living on reserve that attend both Qualset or Brentwood Elementary. There are 2 most heavily populated elementary schools with local on reserve First Nation students. That won't change. So if they were to choose one of those 2 schools, we don't anticipate any significant issue in accommodating the other school of choice or any other elementary school if they want to.
If just one more follow-up, especially given that Qualset is closer for some children and Brentwood is closer for some others. So for the legislation, for the act for the bill now to require the nation to choose one seems pretty offensive to the reality of there's currently free choice, and free choice has led to 2 being predominant. So I hope that there wouldn't be some pressure put on by the bill to the nation to say you better choose one. So I appreciate hearing that we don't foresee a problem, because that'll be a technicality that won't get in the way.
Correct. That's my anticipation.
Thank you. Anything else for this portion of the superintendent's report, trustees? Trustees, sorry.
I did have a second.
No, you go ahead and then trustee Silzer will follow.
And the second is one that I raised at the LEA meeting the other day, which is that the Bill 40 says that each board must establish and maintain an Indigenous Education Council, which makes it sound like it belongs to the board. And in fact, the board is not allowed to put voting members who are trustees or staff members on it. It really does belong to the nation. So there's a rub for me of the bill saying the board must create the IEC, when in fact it's the nation's IEC. So I know that the diplomacy will prevail, that won't be a problem for us, but it's just a concern for me that it seems, like a heavy-handed colonial approach to what is intended to be the support for independence and authority of the nation. Editorial comment.
Sure, I appreciate Trustee Elder's comments. I believe the intention around it was to ensure that every public school board has this council, because they currently do not. And so they are mandated to have it. You are correct, the authority for it, how it operates, who sits on it, is solely at the discretion of the local First Nation. I think because this act is geared towards the 60 public school districts and in ensuring that every school district participates, that's why the act was probably written the way it was. But that's more speculative on my part than informative on my part. Thank you.
Trustee Silzer.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the issue of choice, schools of choice. I just wanted to ask through you, Chair, the superintendent, does this mean that a school of choice is designated so that the Indigenous students priority registration in that school?
To the chair, yes, that they would be guaranteed registration in that school as long as they have met the required registration timelines as set out by the district that are currently in place.
Right. So, and it shouldn't be a problem in our district because, and I guess this refers to catchment numbers. So no Indigenous student would be turned away because the school capacity had been reached.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything further, trustees, on Bill 40? Superintendent.
Thank you. My next topic, sorry, I obviously didn't format this correctly. I'm number 2 all the way down there at the beginning. We have received a policy review request from a parent in the community. And as per policy, I'm bringing it to the board's attention for their consideration and potential action. I do have a recommendation at the end of this. So policy 6, policy making and review, provides clear direction that the board retains sole authority for policy planning, development, implementation, and evaluation. Policy 6 also provides the opportunity for persons who are not of the board to make policy suggestions. And specifically, here's number 1, any trustee, employee, parent, student, or other community member may make suggestions regarding the possible development of a policy or the need for policy revisions on any matter by presenting a proposal for policy revisions in writing to the superintendent. The proposal shall contain a brief statement of purpose or rationale. The superintendent will then inform the board of the request for policy development or revision, and the board will determine the action to be taken. And so that is what is happening here this evening. I received a parent request for the board to consider changes to their policy 16. Included in your board pack this evening is a copy of the actual appeal request from Mr. Gary Ing, a parent at Walsett Elementary School. The board needs to determine what, if any, action they should be taken with this particular request. My recommendation to the board this evening is that the board refer this review request from Mr. Ing to the February 2024 Policy Committee for its consideration and possible recommendations back to the board.
Thank you. Are there any comments, questions, or motions arising from that? Trustee Silzer.
I move that the board refer the policy 16 review request from Gary Ing to the February 2024 Policy Committee for its consideration and possible recommendation to the board.
Seconded by Trustee Elder. Trustee Silzer, do you wish to speak to that?
just to say that I think it's a reasonable request, given the issues that Mr. Eng has raised, and that the policy committee will have the time and the assistance of staff to properly consider the request.
Thank you. Is there further discussion or on the motion? The question then on the motion to refer to the policy committee. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you, Superintendent, for that.
Thank you.
Does that complete? Thank you. Let's proceed then to committee reports. Item 9 is the Education Directions Committee report with Chair Silzer.
Thank you, Chair. The Education Directions Committee had 2 presentations on last Tuesday. The first was a presentation of Beacon Community Services connections with the school district. And we were really pleased to hear from Director of Children, Youth and Family Services, Elaine Venables, and the Beacon CEO, Tricia Guillette, who gave a presentation about the history of Beacon and our different projects that we've had with them over the last, since 1990. Beacon celebrates 50 years of services in our community this year. So it started out as a group of workers who decided that the peninsula needs some community services, and it's grown incredibly over the last 50 years. Benefited as a school district with a number of really important partnerships, including most recently the Sislicet Child Care Center that's about to open. We've had Beacon as a contractor with the Child Development Center. Beacon has provided licensed child care in a number of facilities in the school district. And also, they have provided for many years the Young Parent Student Program at ILC. So we were very pleased to hear from Ms. Venables and Ms. Guillette. And then we also had a presentation by Director Westhaver, Assistant Superintendent Mackenzie, and Director Hunter, who gave us summaries of the feedback from students on the literacy priority of our strategic plan. And their summary really highlighted the richness of the student voice program that we've set up with the strategic plan. So we're very pleased to hear about the student suggestions for improvements, and forward to other presentations on the other priorities of the strategic plan. That is essentially my report for this month. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Silzer, and I see Trustee Vanwell. You have something to add, I think.
Yeah, if it's all right, I just wanted to say that at our committee meeting, Trustee McMurphy had suggested that with Beacon and their presentation, that it might be something that BC STA might be interested in hearing about, given the unique relationship that we have, that the school board has with Beacon, and that it is unique to us, and that the MLA, what was her, sorry. Anyways, that other districts might be interested in hearing about our our relationship with them. And so I, as the BCSTA representative, emailed Suzanne Hoffman at BCSTA about the opportunity, and she got back to me and said that it is something that she thinks that people would like to hear. There's a couple of different thoughts as to how it might be presented. There isn't an opportunity at AGM, but if we have an interest, we might be able to put a presentation together. So I will forward this email on to the other trustees, and maybe we can develop a presentation for the BCSTA at an appropriate time.
Are you awaiting further information from Ms. Hoffman about it, Trustee Van Wel?
I don't think so. I think she's more looking for some information from us as to the size of the presentation, how long we need it, what else did she say? What the ideas of the content are. It was more of a generic email that I had sent to her if she thought that it might be something that trustees would like to hear about. So I think what we need to do is have a discussions on what the presentation might look like and who would attend. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Questions for Committee Chair Silzer or Trustee Van Wel arising out of the report? Trustee McMurphy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, through you to both of you, I guess. I'm really pleased to hear you followed up on that, and I'm hoping that BCSTA will let us put our foot through the door a little bit. But I'm hoping that whatever we suggest or whatever plan we develop, we could do it with Beacon so that they would be a part of the presentation. It would be just us.
Yeah, that was the idea that I had suggested.
Okay.
And so that's something that they thought would be a good idea too.
When you said we, you meant us and Beacon.
Exactly. Yes.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Trustee Van Wel?
Yes, Chair. I think it's something that should be done imminently within the year, because it's a way to celebrate 15 years for Beacon and a way for us to profile what that partnership has done for our students in our district and for people in our community.
Yes, good. That's a good point, Trustee Van Wel. As Trustee Van Wel indicated, the 2024 AGM is already designed and filled, but as I understand it from Trustee Van Wel's report, there are other opportunities that BCSTA may offer once they receive further information from us. So a timely presentation involving both the board and Beacon, I think, is a possibility. Other questions or comments on the directions report? Thank you, Trustee Silzer. And we'll move then to item 10, the Finance, Facilities and Technology Report with Committee Chair Albert.
Thank you, Chair. There were two main items that were discussed as part of the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee meeting. The first was based on a presentation from Director Henschel on the Refresh Ed update, which I'll just comment before going to the motion, provided again a very clear overview of the success of the transition to the current state of affairs with regard to technology, both in terms of the operation of the school district and in terms of the work with staff and students, and most importantly with students in terms of using technologies to support learning. And one thing I'll ask the Secretary Treasurer to confirm through you, Chair, is that through this presentation, it was made clear that while there is currently an ongoing $750,000 budget for this for information technology overall, it was made clear that to stay on a 5-year replacement cycle for the systems that are in place now, especially for students, would require a bump to $1.1 million that was presented as part of the presentation, which seems to be a suggestion that, or a request that, which may emerge to the board through the budget planning process, including your budget advisory, that there would be a request to bump the budget by that $450,000 on an ongoing basis to provide for a 5-year refresh plan with technology systems as they're now being brought into sort of their final place of, well, their current, high level of operation. That's correct, Secretary Treasurer?
Yeah, that's correct. The presentation reflected that without additional funds, there would be a need to alter the deliverables and expectations with respect to technology. And the funding increase proposed was to enable us to maintain the expectation that has been communicated through the plan.
It was a clear and compelling case, and I appreciated the way in which it was presented. There was also an indication that's in the presentation that is attached to the committee report that the replacement cycle has fallen behind to the point where a double replacement cycle would be ideal for next year, which created another request, I believe, for $550,000. Which may need to be considered as well by the board as a one-time expenditure as opposed to as an ongoing expenditure. So while it was mostly about the great success of the implementation of these services and supports and programs that provide for enhanced operation of the district and enhanced learning for students, there was that element of it that was a highlight for the board for upcoming budget deliberations. I wanted to make sure that was clear to people. I have one motion arising out of this that came from a subsequent discussion around how many of these challenges are brought about through inflationary pressures. And the committee recommends, and I trustee Elder move that the board seek an early meeting for the Minister of Education and Childcare to discuss, among other inflationary cost pressures, the inflationary cost pressure relating to information technology.
Second, Trustee Hickman. Trustee Elder.
I think it speaks for itself, although I know there are other trustees who may wish to speak to this.
Trustees, do you have any comments, questions? Trustee McMurphy.
I mean, it's getting to be the tradition that we go and bang on the minister's door and say we want more money, or we send letters saying we want more money. I mean, it's chronic, it's unrelenting. But in this day and age, when information technology is such a pervasive part of everything we do and how we do everything. I mean, it's like in the old days, you couldn't exist without textbooks. In this day and age, you can't exist without information technology, and we do a disservice to our students if we're not preparing them to live in that world. And we just simply are not getting enough money to do what are now one would consider to be the basics, because we can't, according to the presentation, we are band-aiding, we are limping, we are stop-gapping, we are stretching, we are recycling, we are doing everything possible to make the existing budgets meet the demands of, the almost going into the second quarter of the 20th century and 21st century. I need technology to help me. But, this is the world we live in. And we can't ignore the fact that we have to have these technological supports, not just for staff to make sure they can do their jobs, but so the students can learn to be technologically ready for the world that they're going to live in, for the life they're going to lead when they leave our schools. And if there were a way to, print computers on papyrus, maybe we'd be all right, but, we're not there. We gotta live in this day and age, and we have to have the support from the government for the basic tools. They're basic tools now. They're not extras. They're not nice to haves. They're essential. And, the superintendent's presentation on AI is, strike that from the record. If the superintendent were to make a presentation on AI, I'm sure that this is, one of the things that would be a feature in the world that we're facing.
Thank you, trustee McMurphy.
Well, sorry about that.
Sorry, quite all right. Trustee Hickman.
I am in support of this motion. We are mandated by the Ministry of Education and Childcare to improve student successes, and we cannot do it without technology, period.
Any further comments, trustees? Then I'll put the question on the motion to seek the meeting with the minister. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you.
Chair, of interest in that, the backdrop to that motion is that, we were made aware that there are some elements of the technology infrastructure that's required to run a district and provide supports for learning and for all of our services that have gone up extraordinarily large, in an extraordinary large measure relative to inflation, switches and the kinds of things that need in the backdrop that have doubled in price. This isn't just a small inflationary pressure, it's significant. I note that papyrus has gone up for 20% as well year over year. The other item that was discussed was one item that was presented just for information, but became a good discussion point, which was the first look at the fiscal forecast for year end. Highly detailed document prepared by Director Sineglia and Secretary Treasurer Reed, which does show a number of variances against budgeted numbers that are understandable and explainable and in some ways predictable. And also shows the bottom line, an estimated closing contingency reserve slightly higher than the last one the board would have seen. So there was some good discussion around that, and it was a relatively good news discussion, both in terms of clarity and in terms of the prospects being even a little rosier than we had anticipated. So thank you, Secretary Treasurer Reed, and to Director Sineglia through you for that good work. And that concludes my report unless there are questions on any of those matters.
Thank you, Trustee Elder. Are there any questions on Trustee Elder's committee report? Thank you, Trustee Elder. Let's proceed with the Policy Development Committee report. Committee Chair, Trustee Van Wel.
Thanks, Chair. So we at the Policy Committee have 2 items for recommendation. The first being Policy 3, and the motion reads, the committee recommends and I, Trustee Van Wel, move as the required notice of motion has been provided on September 20th, 2023. I, Trustee Van Wel, move that revisions to Policy 3, role of the trustee, be approved.
Seconded by Trustee McMurphy. Trustee Van Wel, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Sure, just briefly, we updated in the policy on number 16, we added the VISTA and one trustee selected professional development opportunity. And when it went out review, there was no revisions of any kind suggested. And so I recommend that we move this through.
Other comments, trustees? All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you.
And then the second recommendation came through Director Hunter and Principal Austin submitted amendments to Policy 28 Core French. The committee had an opportunity to talk about the suggested revisions, and the committee decided that and the revisions were in regards to adding Senchothan, so they can choose Senchothan instead of Core French. And the committee decided that because Policy 28 is titled Core French, that we actually, what we would needed to do was to redo this policy and have it reflect more of a second language policy. So we've provided directions to staff to consider several policy amendments to this policy at a future policy meeting. And that is my report.
Thank you. Any questions arising for Trustee Van Wel? Thank you, Trustee Van Wel, for your report. We will move then to item 13, reports from trustee representatives. And I'll call on you, if I may, Trustee Silzer, with respect to the BCPC annual general meeting.
Thank you, Chair. I asked that this be on the agenda in preparation for next week's BCPC AGM, which will be held virtually on January 25th for half a day. And I sent to trustees a package of material that I've received, including the audited financial statements from last year, the proposed budget for this year, the profiles for 2 candidates who are running for the BCPC Board of Directors, as well as 2 special resolutions that would amend the BCPC bylaws. Yesterday, I attended a virtual meeting in anticipation of the AGM, whereby the chair of BCPC's board and staff went over the proposed budget and answered any questions. There were none really. Because trustees have received the materials on the financial, on all these 4 documents, I'm wondering if anybody has any questions. I'm planning to vote in favor of the housekeeping amendments to the bylaws. They're pretty straightforward and uncontroversial, and or non-controversial. And also, since there's no election actually to be held for the board of director positions, because there are 2 positions open and only 2 candidates running in each region. So, Chair, if that's acceptable, I would simply ask for questions, or if anybody wants any further clarification.
Yes, thank you, Trustee Silver. So the election's a non-issue because those 2 incumbents are offering themselves again. So they'll be by acclamation. But are there any questions arising from the other matters that Trustee Silver addressed? Apparently not, Trustee Silver. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Trustees, item 4 has to do with correspondence, and there are 2 pieces before us this evening. One, a letter from the North Saanich Municipality advising of the identity of their liaison counselor and alternate liaison counselor. And the second one from the town of View Royal with respect to transit fares. Is there any discussion on either of those, trustees?
Just note that the liaison from North Saanich to our public school board sends his children to a private school.
Yes, thank you, trustee. Anything else, trustees, with respect to the correspondence, or shall we move on? All right, thank you. That'll take us to item 15, our second question period. If there are any questions from our guests or our partner representatives, now is the time. If you're not seeing any, we would.
Sorry, I just found a note.
Yes?
I'm just wondering that with regard to the regional fee and discounted transit passes,
Yes.
I was wondering if it'd be appropriate for us to offer support
Well,
to that request.
you could certainly present a motion, Trustee McMurphy.
I don't know much about it, that's what I'm kind of testing the water here.
Oh, you'd like some feedback first?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's
I
back.
could propose the motion, could get defeated if everybody's got more knowledge.
Well, no.
than I do.
No, I'm not sure that anybody does, but by all means, let's back up to item 14, to the letter of the town of View Royal with respect to the transit fare issue. Trustees, does anybody know anything about this? Do you have any questions? Trustee McMurphy is testing, see if there's support for the request for support.
I don't know how much it pertains to us because we have our school buses, and this is more for districts or areas that don't have school buses, but I'm sure there are, nonetheless, I know that there are lots of kids in our area that do use the city buses, so.
Not seeing much feedback, trustee McMurphy.
I'll try a motion. That School District 63 support the request of the town of Huron Royal to BC Transit regarding discounted fares for youth.
Is there a seconder for that, trustee Hickman? Anybody want to speak to that?
I thought school-age kids already got discounts. Was that something that was removed?
This is just a slight change in this changing from suggesting that the free, changing the eligibility for the free passes from 13 to 12 and reduce transit fares by 50% for youth ages 14 and 15 and fare discounts to 16 to 18.
I don't see any reason why we couldn't support it. I mean,
Very well. Thank you. Any other comments, trustees? I'll put the question then, if you're comfortable. Are you ready to vote? All in favor? Opposed? Thank you. The motion's carried. Trustee McMurphy. Superintendent?
Could I, perhaps I'm missing something, but could I get clarification as to what that support will look like? Is it a letter? Is it?
Yeah, just a letter to CRD.
That's what I inferred from the motion. Thank you. All right, thank you. We'll move back to question period. Ms. Misovic, I think you have a question for us. Is that right?
Yeah, I was just, did I miss the COPAX meeting report?
Well, there hasn't been one, so it's a good reminder. Under our partner representatives, I think it was trustee Hickman and trustee Vandal who attended this time. Trustees, do you have anything to offer from your attendance at the meeting?
well, I shared with COPAX members that we were entering into our budget advisory stages and when the meetings would be and that they were open to the public and everyone was welcome and early input was encouraged.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything to add, trustee Vandal?
And I shared a very short report on Trustee Academy and student voice sessions.
Anything arising from that, Ms. Misovic?
No, it just, our agenda had a whole bunch of stuff in it as well. And I'm not sure the best way of sharing it with the table. That's kind of the component that we heard from our school district partners. But yeah, there's a number of pieces of business that might be of interest to the board. I'm not sure the best way of reporting that at this table, but yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Perhaps we can continue to work on that process, President Misovic, and certainly I think it's open to COPAX to suggest to the trustees in attendance that if there are specific items they think would be of real interest to the board, I'm sure that would receive a good reception. So don't be shy about doing that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for raising it. Are there any other questions from our partner representative? Thank you. Since there is no other business and no information items, is there any objection, trustees, to adjourning at this time? Hearing none, I declare that our regular meeting of January 17, 2024 is adjourned. Thank you for your contributions this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.